it got to the point where B could no longer hold on to Jessie by herself. Okay, so the episode obviously picks up where it left off with Sherlock and the Linen Man in the cave at the rip. So the Linen Man is explaining that the barrier is about to collapse, and if he doesn't do something, it's basically going to destroy everyone and everything. And so just as he was about to start whatever this ceremony ritual is, Sherlock pulls a gun on him and basically was reminding him of the deal they made. So now we know why Sherlock went with the Linen Man. Now at this point we have no idea what this deal is, but we can surmise that he would help him if he brought Alice back.
How do I know you'll keep your side of the bargain? You'll get what you came for.
So everyone is at 221 Baker Street. At this point, Jessie is awake and she has been informed that Sherlock has gone off with the Linen Man, and she, of course, is not happy, and she let her feelings be known.
Sherlock Holmes is a wanker. I can't believe you just walk off with him.
So while Jessie and B are talking, in the next room, Watson, Billy, Leo, and Spike are going to arm themselves. So they go into the cabinet where they keep the guns and other weapons. And Watson is basically telling them that the longer the rip stays open, the more monsters we're going to see, and basically the streets are dangerous and to be careful.
The streets are going to be much worse now. As the rip widens, there'll be more and more monsters. We need to be ready.
So at this point, they've all armed themselves and they are on their way to the inner circle line where they were supposed to start building it, which is obviously where the Linen Man and Sherlock is. So it flashed back to the cave where the Linen Man, he drew this symbol and he says this incantation, and then the next thing you know, this bolt of light shoots out of the cave into the sky. And so at this point, Watson and all the rest of them, they can see this light in the sky. Now keep in mind, all while this is going on, the streets are getting more and more chaotic. So now they're like really trying to hurry up to get there to stop this from happening. So they eventually arrived, and they couldn't go through the same entrance because they had barricaded the entrance, so they had to go through the sewers. And so as they're going through the sewers, it quickly flashed to the Linen Man as he's starting to absorb these powers. And so it flashed back to the group, and they're trying to make their way through the sewers. Watson is telling them that they need to be quiet, because if they hear them, if they are unable to use the element of surprise, then they're done for. So they, move ahead. B is in the back, and her mind starts going off again, and she sees one of the most painful memories that she has, which is when she was told that her mother had died.
I need you to be strong for me. Something has happened to your mum.
And of course, this caused all sorts of emotions to come out, and she started screaming and crying, and now they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're trying to keep her quiet, but at this point, they've already heard her. So at this point, the Linen Man basically left to go and take care of them. Now, when he initially said, okay, we need to end this now, I'm thinking, okay, what, is he going to go and kill them? No, he had something far more nefarious. So basically, he was slipping and sliding through these caves. And the first person he touched was Billy. And of course, his biggest fear was Vic. And so he see the decaying corpse of Vic approaching him and of course taunting him like he did that night. And the second person was Spike, and all you could hear was Spike saying, don't hurt her, or don't hurt, or why are you doing this? He was saying something, but they never showed what his fear was. And then they flashed to Leo. Now, I don't remember him when he touched Leo, but Leo started having, remember he's a hemophiliac, and so his nose started bleeding, and the next thing you know, he's covered in blood coming out his ears. He's panicked, so they're all going through it. Watson is still trying to get B under control, because she's now in this, like, having this emotional going through this emotional turmoil. At this point, Jessie has decided that she has to confront the Linen Man and do what she can to stop all this mess going on. So she runs off. So he starts talking about how impressed he is that basically he didn't think that she had it in her.
I underestimated how far off the road to mastery you had traveled.
And that he's sorry, but now he's going to have to kill her. And he, of course, appears behind her and he grabs her. And then they end up going into a memory. And you saw this black guy and this white guy. And so he was looking like, who are they? And so where you initially thought that when he grabbed her, that he had gone into one of her memories, she had actually gone into one of his memories.
It's you. These are your memories. This isn't my mind.
And she started talking to him about the white guy that was with him, and because of course he's always had this ability, and she's saying he was the first guy that you hurt because you were jealous of the girl that he was with. And so you can see that he had done something to this guy, and he's like curled up in a ball, much like Leo and the rest of them. And he's basically saying that there's really nothing that she could do to affect him. Like he is basically, she's not going to be able to break him. And so she ends up telling him that, you told me that you killed or, hurt thousands of people, and it's impossible to hurt that many people. And every time you hurt someone, you take a part of that with you.
You've seen the fear of 1,000 men. Well, each time you tortured someone, you took a piece of what they felt with you.
When she ends up grabbing him and he starts going through it, and the next thing you know, he ends up falling down the cave, basically, I guess, where he was going to end up pushing her eventually. So after he was critically injured, the apparitions, whatever they were going through, Leo, Billy, and Spike stopped, and B just stopped, because I guess he didn't have the power to, control them anymore, because like I said, he was more critically injured. Like you could see he wasn't gonna make it. So once they all get back together, there was, because the rip is still getting bigger, and it's the collapse is getting worse, and so the cave part of the cave collapsed, and when that happened, it separated them. So Watson and B was on one side, and Billy, Spike, and Leah was on the other side. Spike ends up one of the rocks ended up falling on his leg and breaking his leg. So once they were able to verify that everybody was okay, B was basically telling them, just go back to the cellar, because at this point they're not going to be able to get through. And of course, initially Spike didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave them. But again, there's really no way for them to get through. Remember, the other entrance is blocked. They end up having to go through the sewer. And so now that way is blocked. And so eventually they reluctantly left to go back to the cellar. And Watson and B continued on. So Jessie eventually made her way down. And eventually she could hear, B and Watson could hear her, so they eventually met up. And so they could see that the Linen Man was critically injured. At this point, he was still able to communicate a bit. And he basically told her that when he touched Arthur, he saw more than where the rip was. He saw who opened it.
I didn't just see the rip's location. I saw who opened it.
And so she's like, okay, who was it? Who's responsible for this? And so he says, deep down, I think you know who it was.
Deep down somewhere. You must know.
And so the next, she takes off down the tunnel and she makes it all the way to the rip. Sherlock is still standing there, just eyes bugged out, looking at this thing getting bigger and bigger. Watson and B are, follow shortly behind. So now they're just kind of watching to see what's going to happen next. And who steps out? Alice. So Alice was responsible for opening the rip. So it quickly flashed. So at this point, it's quickly flashing back between them in the cave and Billy, Leo, and Spike trying to make their way back to the cellar. So they're on their way back, and people in the streets are literally devouring each other. they came across this guy who was like eating the intestines of another guy, and they figured since he wasn't coming after them, so they continued on. So of course they're in shock. She stepped out, and she talked about how proud she was to see them and how beautiful they were, and you can see Sherlock standing there, and he's he was speechless. Like, he was so happy, happy to see her. And at this point, she had noticed him. She was more focused on, her children, which made sense.
Look how much I missed.
And, she hugged them and, talked about how they're going to be a family again. And then she saw Sherlock, and then she went over to Sherlock, initially really excited to see him, saying that how he did a great job raising their girls, and they turned out great. And then he had to tell her that he failed.
My love, you did a fine job of raising our girls.
I have to tell you.
And she's like, how she let him down, and she said, what's going on? What are you talking about? And so he ended up having to tell her that he wasn't the one that raised them. And she's like, wait a minute, well, what happened? If you didn't raise them, what happened? And they ended up saying, we ended up in the workhouse. And he's like groveling. He's down on his knees, grabbing her, holding her legs, telling her how sorry he is. And she basically was telling him, like, it's no longer, when you have children, it's no longer about you. It's about the girls. It's always been about the girls.
You became a father. It stopped being about me and you, Sherlock. It's about the girls.
And he's saying how sorry he was. And of course, B is, so why did you go all with the monster and abandon me yet again? This is when he left with the linen man and kind of just left him behind.
Last night, you ran off on your own with that monster and you left me. You abandoned me again.
So that was not what she wanted to hear after 15 years, that, he had the means to take them in and take care of them, and didn't. So while this is going on, Alice is still talking about how great she is, happy she is to see them, and how, this whole, we're going to be a family again. And you can kind of see that Jessie is sensing that something is off, and then she ends up asking her mom, like, why did you reopen the rip? And you saw her facial expression kind of change. Like, they're kind of like, well, why is she asking? Well, because the reason she was asking is, what happens when you do this, especially having firsthand knowledge. So why would you do this again?
Why are you opening the rip, Mom?
And so Alice, basically was telling her that, the monsters are temporary, and once the collapse happens, then you won't have to worry about this, anymore. And Watson is talking about once the barrier is destroyed, then we'll be consumed by her world, and like, we don't even know where you were. Where were you? And then she starts talking about how she was where people go when they're not ready to move on. And then he came out and said that she was in purgatory. You want this to be, everything to turn into purgatory. And Jessie wasn't happy. She was like, well, no, we can't let this happen. And the mom was basically like, she's sorry, but this is what's going to happen in order for them to stay together, in order for them to be a family.
And no more death means no more grief. I'm sorry, Jessica.
And Jessie knew that it was wrong, and so she decided she was going to close the rip. And Alice ends up saying, if you close the rip, then I'm going to be sent back. And so, of course, B ends up, stopping Jessie, telling her, no, she can't let her close the rip. And so now it's like a standoff between B and Jessie. So they eventually make it back to the cellar, and, they got it locked up as best they can. On the way, there was a whole altercation where they end up, Sister Anne, which is the nun that took them in, but I don't know how well they know Sister Anne. And there were two other people that, they brought back to the cellar with them to try to give them some shelter. And so they're now in there, and you hear the monsters literally banging on the door, trying to rip the doors of the cellar open. And initially, Billy was like, you know what, at this point during the closed-in space, and there wasn't a whole lot he could do, and then he's injured, and initially he was going to give up, but it was surprise Leo basically saying that you need to stand up and you need to defend your home. And so again at this point it's going back and forth between the cave and now them in the cellar. So back at the cave, you got Jesse and B. Jesse is trying to get up there to close the rip. B is standing in her way, so Jesse ends up grabbing her and going into their memories. And Jesse, because B, her whole thing is our life has been hell ever since, our mom died. We went to the workhouse. We, you experienced all this abuse. We've starved. We've been cold. We've had the struggle for everything that we have, and all B could see was all the bad things. And so, she was basically telling Jesse that, there's nothing that you're going to show me that's going to change my mind. And so the first memory she showed her was them in the cellar. And it was this game that they were playing. And, despite everything that happened before and everything that happened, I guess, at any point in that day, at that point in time, they were ecstatic. They were together. They were playing some game. I mean, they were grinning from ear to ear, just having a great time. And then the second memory was between her and Leo. And that was when she really didn't want to revisit. And Jesse was like, well, look at how he's looking at you, that he loves you, he cares for you, and you can kind of hear some of the conversation that's being had between Leo and B.
Jesse, please look at how into you he is.
And then the next memory she took her to was when they initially went to the orphanage. The nun basically they had to separate them because Jessie was a baby, so they had to put her in the nursery and be in a room. And the nun was kind of nasty about it, and she's basically saying that this is going to be your home now, and nobody's coming for you, and just unnecessarily cruel to be. And so after she left, she showed her how she went across the hall to the nursery to check on Jessie to make sure that she was okay.
Even in a place like this, in the darkness, there was a light that shone.
And Jessie was like, you've always been there to look after me and look over me. And basically, we've been through a lot, but we've also had a lot of good times together too. So they quickly flash back to the guys in the cellar, and they're still waiting for these hordes of people to come pouring down, try to get at them. And then Leo ends up hearing the sister praying with the other two people, and so he's telling her to stop and not to do that because at this point, he was saying that anybody who wished for something or asked for powers, they are just being granted now. That's how weak the barrier is now between our world and the next. And so as soon as she said amen, you saw a complete change in her, and they knew that, okay, so now we have to worry about the monsters that's on the outside of the door, and now we got to deal with the one that's in here. So now back in the cave, they're now back in the present, and Alice was asking B, like, what did she tell you? What did she show you? What did she say? And so B ended up agreeing that they need to close the rip. And of course Alice is saying, well, no, like I was saying, when the barrier collapses, then there won't be, any more grief or any more heartache or these things won't exist. And B ended up saying that we're not hurt because we grieve. We are hurting because we didn't grieve.
It wasn't grieving that hurt us, it was that we didn't grieve.
And to a certain extent, they never did, because as soon as their mother died, they were thrust into a situation where they had to go into survival mode. So it wasn't something that they ever really dealt with. And of course, Sherlock escaped using drugs. So, I mean, that made sense. And, B ends up hugging her and telling her, thank you for giving me the chance to say goodbye. And so Jessie, then Jessie went up to do what she needed to do to close the rip. So the sister has already killed the other two people that they helped. that came down with her, and now she's going after the guys. Spike ended up shooting her, and she ends up saying that heathen weapons have no power over me.
Heathen weapons cannot harm the anointed.
So she ends up tossing him this way, and she ended up tossing Billy the other way, and then, you know, she ended up going after Leo, talking about a baptism or something, and so now she's trying to baptize Leo to death. So it got to the point where Allison knew that she was leaving, and so she took the time that she had left to tell them how much she loved them, and they got to say they loved her, and you saw her kind of disintegrate. So shortly after that happened, Sherlock, you know, ends up turning to Watson and saying that he was the best friend that anybody could ever have, and then he took off running because he wanted to go. At this time he wanted to go with her. And so, of course, Watson ran behind him to try to keep him, you know, to save him from himself again. Well, not again, because he was trying to save Allison the last time. So, he's now trying to save Sherlock. So it quickly flashed to the cellar where the Sister Anne, she is still on Leo. How he was able to survive as long as he did in that water, I have no idea. So they flash back to the cave, and B is trying to hold on to Jessie to keep her from getting sucked in. Watson is trying to hold on to Sherlock to keep him from getting sucked in. It got to the point where B could no longer hold on to Jessie by herself. And so she ends up begging Watson to help her. Help me! My God! And he ended up having to make that tough decision, and he had to let Sherlock go, and he helped B save Jessie. What? And eventually the rip closed. So once the rip closed, it seemed like Anna just disappeared. And so, I mean, I was thinking that when it happened, that maybe whatever abilities they had would just dissipate, and then they would be all in this daze, like, okay, what happened? Where am I? Why am I? How did I get here? But no, she was gone. So did half the city disappear? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, so at this point, they're doing a check. Leo is somehow survived being underwater all that time. Billy is okay, and then of course they were concerned because at this point they hadn't heard hide no hair of Spike after she had knocked him through the door, and he started moving around, so they knew that he was going to be okay. So the next scene, they're at the cemetery, and they're just having this small ceremony for their mom, and Watson is there, and they said a few words, and after they left, B ended up saying to Watson, after the rest of them left, B stayed behind with Watson, and she asked, so now that Sherlock is gone, what are you going to do? And, you know, he basically said that he would find some things to busy himself. And she invited him to dinner, and he told her that he had plans, and so she went on her way. So later that night, you know, because she was saying how they had saved up their money for a treat, so they were able to get fish and chips and beer and all this, and they were just having a good old time at home. And eventually Leo asked her outside because he, you know, wanted to go for a walk and talk to her. And unfortunately, he told her that you know, he would have to go back.
I promised my mother I'd go to Europe this week. I leave tomorrow.
And of course she's trying to figure out, like, well, why are you leaving? And, you know, you don't have to do this. And, she don't really understand how all of this works. She thinks that he could just be, if he just feels like he don't want to do it, he can just walk away. And that's just not how things are. And he ends up telling her about Eleanor, his betrothed. And of course she's asking him, like, how do you feel about her? And he's like, I barely know her. And he ends up telling her that he's in love with her, which is making this a lot worse. And of course she kept saying that, why don't you stay? Why don't you stay? And he eventually had to tell her that he made a deal with his mother that he would go, like I said, marry Eleanor if they helped Billy.
I agreed to it because it was the only way I could get them to help Billy.
And so that's how Billy got out of jail. And he ended up, and he also told her that don't tell Billy because he doesn't know, and I don't want him to feel bad about it. And you know, she still wanted him to stay, and he's telling her that, you know, I fear that if I don't go, that they will come back and take Billy away again. And so it was a bad situation, and so they end up, it was an emotional goodbye, but they end up saying their goodbyes. So B ends up going to see Watson, and when she walked in the house, he was standing in the sitting room, and he was just staring at, I guess, what was once Sherlock's chair, and she had brought him food, fish and chips, which is what they had for dinner. And she was like, "You're kind of underdressed for, you know, someone who has plans."
Bit underdressed for going out to dinner, aren't you?
And so it flashed to Spike and Jesse, and you know, they're talking and they're laughing. And she asked the question, like, when they were in the tunnel, what did you see? Because remember, they never showed what his biggest fear was. And he told her that it was you. Like, I saw you everywhere and you were hurt.
I saw you everywhere. He was hurt.
And, you know, she kind of just laid on his shoulder. You could tell Spike is in love with Jesse. And so the final scene, B and Watson are having a dinner. And they had this funny conversation about tattoos, and she started asking him why he never got the tattoos that Sherlock and Alice got. And he's like, he found them to be basically abhorrent. He hates tattoos. She was like, "Oh, I thought it was because you were a weenie." And so he made the mistake of saying, "Well, I tell you what, when you decide that you're going to get a tattoo, I'll go and I'll get one too." And so she kind of chuckled. He's like, "What? What are you laughing at? What's going on?" And so she ended up pulling her sleeve down and showed she already had a tattoo. And so she was like, "Do you know any all-night tattoo parlors, right?" And so, of course, he eventually said, "I am not getting a tattoo." So she kind of laughed about that. And then the conversation got, you know, kind of emotional. She was like, "So how do you," she ended up asking him, "How do you stop loving someone?"
How do you stop loving someone?
And he says, "You don't." And she got emotional, and it was quite sad. And of course, him being the kind of person he is, he's like, "Are you okay?" Clearly she's not okay. She's bawling her eyes out, right? She's looking for some comfort, right? And so he kind of got up, like he was going to leave her to, you know, to herself. And then he turned around and he put his hand on her shoulder. And I guess that's all, you know, pretty much all you could expect from Watson. It's like, it was just, you know, he wasn't trying to get too, you know, huggy, you know, like that. But it was just a little something to say, you know, I'm here, you know. And, you know, that's how the season ended. And I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.